Hey guys, today we'll be building this beautiful looking calculator over here that does exactly what a calculator needs to do and calculate some information for you. We're going to be looking at adding some functionality, like if you try to calculate something that is not calculatable, if that's even a word, you'll get this nice error feedback message, and we've been knocking this one out only with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So as you guys can see here on my Visual Studio Code, what I've done, I went ahead and created my index.html file, I've created my CSS file and my empty JavaScript file. So what I would suggest you guys do at this moment is go ahead and install an extension called Live Server. So if I go to extensions over here called Live Server, I suggest you guys install this, and this is going to allow you to run your index.html file locally without having to run XAMPP or whatever other server application in order to see this. So go ahead and install that. If you have done so using Visual Studio Code, you guys are ready to code along with this one. So in my HTML file, you guys will see I'm just linking to a Google font that I'm using with this one. I'm linking to my style sheet, which is this one. I'm linking to my calculator.js file right here at the bottom to do my calculation. So what I'm going to do is just firstly run this so you guys can see how it looks. I'm going to right click, open with Live Server, that extension just mentioned, and what Live Server is going to do is just open up this file for me in the browser, and you guys can see it's a blank gradient background. And if you're wondering where this gradient is coming from, that's coming from my style.css file. So what I've done is I've just went ahead and reset everything, my padding 0, margin 0, box sizing, border box, and then in my body I'm just using that font that I got from Google. I'm saying display flex, align item center, justify content center in order to center everything inside of this div, or inside of this body. Then I've given a min height of 100 VH and added that gradient background. So what we need to do now, first thing first, is just go back to our reference calculator, clear it out, and have a look at these elements. We firstly have a header section, which is basically our display section. We have our buttons, which count about 18 buttons, and we need to create that in our HTML. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to go ahead and create a class called container, and inside of this class I'm going to have another class, or an ID actually, called display, which is going to be the display section above. And I'm also going to add a class called buttons, which is going to be a div that wraps all of my buttons into one. So inside of my display, what I'm going to do here is just set 0 so that has that 0 displayed. And inside here, I'm going to go ahead and create those 18 buttons. And what I can do, because of Emmet that I have with my Visual Studio Code, I can do dot button, which is going to create a div element for me, times 18, which is going to create 18 of them for me. And there we go. And now I'm going to go to the boring part, is where I actually type each one of these numbers and functions inside of these divs. So if you want to, you can go ahead and fast forward this part. If you don't want to, go ahead and type it out with me. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. First one I'm going to do is say divide. So it's clear, delete, divide, 7, 8, 9, and next to 9 I got multiply, 4, 5, 6. And you guys can go ahead and structure this any way that you want to, the way that you feel most comfortable, or the way that you feel a calculator should have been done in the first place. You know, it's not like this is a standard, it's a must your calculator to look like this. No, my man, this is your calculator. You can rearrange the numbers any way you feel like it. It's your calculator. And there we go. So we have our calculated numbers. I'm going to save this. Let's review this. And you guys have created a calculator. Well done. Give yourself a hand of applause. You can stop this video. Go ahead on your YouTube rant and watch any other videos that you want to watch, because this tutorial is done. If you guys would like to make your calculator more beautiful than this and add some functionality to it, then stay tuned. If not, yeah, you are done here. So what we're gonna do is add some styling inside of this one, and the first thing we're gonna do is smash that like button, hit the subscribe button if you haven't done so. If you have, the first thing that you want to do is actually just create a class called container, and then start adding the styles to it. So the first thing that we want to do is to say I'm going to add a background to my container. So my background color is actually going to be white. I want my calculator to stand out from the background gradient. I'm going to add a min width of 400 pixels. That's the minimum width, and I'm going to add a minimum height for it as well of 600 pixels. And I'm just going to add a border radius of 15 pixels all around. And that is my container. Next thing I want to do is take that ID of display, which is where we're going to display our output. So I'm going to give it a font size of 35 pixels. I'm going to give it a color of white. So I'm going to make the color white. The next thing I want to do is say text, align them right. Have anyone ever questioned why a calculator text is actually aligned right and not left, seeing that we're reading from left to right? Let me know in the comments if you guys have ever wondered about that. So what I'm going to do is add a background color, and then my background color is going to be 5F47C1, and that is the background color for my display. I'm going to add a padding as well, and my padding is going to be 35 pixels by 15. So top and bottom 35, left and right 15. So I'm going to do border radius, and I'm going to add a border radius of 15 pixels, 15 pixels, 0, 0. So I'm saying top left 15, top right 15, bottom right 0, bottom left 0. So if I save this, you guys can see our calculator is taking shape. We have our 0, which is basically what we've entered in there. And then we have our background color, we have our border radius, and we have our nice sharp edges right there at the bottom. So the next thing we want to do is actually take a look at those buttons and aligning them beautifully. So I'm going to go ahead and do the container of buttons, actually called buttons. I'm going to display this one as grid. And in my grid, I'm going to say my grid template columns is going to be 1 fraction, 1 fraction, 1 fraction, and 1 fraction. So there's supposed to be FR, FR, FR. So I'm saying take this grid and divide it for me into 4. So basically what it's going to do is going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, make that a row, 1, 2, 3, 4, make it a row, and etc. So that's basically what this is doing over here. And while that's happening, what I'm going to do is say space them all evenly. So I'm going to say justify content space evenly. I'm going to add a border left of 1 pixel, solid white, and a border bottom 1 pixel, solid white. If you guys are liking the sound of my keyboard, it's actually a mechanic keyboard that I recently got. I really love it, and I actually wanted you guys to hear it in the video as I type. I don't know, just something with that sound that you hear of a button that gets you all excited to code, you know. So if we quickly save this and have a look at this styling, and you guys will see it did exactly that. It divided my buttons into 4, so it will count 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's basically that grid template columns over there. If you guys would like me to explain more about grid display and how to lay out items using grid, hit me up in the comments and I will do just that for you. So by button, what I'm going to do is say display flex, and what I want to do is say align item center, justify content as well center. I'm going to give it a flex grow of 1, and I'm going to give it a min height. So I'm giving my button a min height of 100 pixels, and my background color of my button is going to be like an offish gray, EEE. I'm going to add a border to each button, if I can type border. So I'm going to have a border of pixel 1, which is going to be a solid, and it's going to be white. So what I want to do is when people hover over this buttons actually is to change the cursor. So I'm going to go ahead and change the cursor to a pointer, which is usually an indicator that this element is clickable. I'm going to do a font weight of 600. I'm going to do a font size of 27 pixels. And last but not least, I'm going to do a color of hashtag 444, which is like a ugly grayish color. So if I save that, you guys would see that the calculator is taking shape right about now. I am missing something. Border solid is spelled incorrectly, and there we go. So as you guys can see, we got that running. And over here, what I'm going to do is just do a border white all around, save it. I think that kind of makes sense. And then in my container, I'm just going to add 15 pixel 00 because I wanted to have a sharp edges at the bottom over here and not a border radius. There we go. So that's our button. The next thing I want to do is actually do, as you guys would see inside of this one, we have this AC button, much big, take up 2 columns, and my equal to sign button, and we need to do that here as well. And how we can do that, just add a class basically, which is a custom class that I'm calling span, and I'm going to say grid column to span. So for you guys who are wondering what is happening, Visual Studio Code gives out this nasty explanation which makes no sense at all. And the easiest way I can explain this to you guys is that if you come from a background of using tables, this is basically the same. Where in table you will use something like call span equal to, and that will take up that much of cells for that one element. So if you said call span equal to 3, it will take up 3 cells and make it 1. This is basically what's happening. So if I save this span over here, nothing happens because I still go add that class inside of these 2 buttons, which is my clear button and my equal to button. So I'm saying these 2 buttons should take up a space of 2 columns. If I save that, that happens exactly. So my AC take up a space of 2 columns, my equal sign take up a space of 2 columns. And that's basically what this grid column does to span. So last but not least, in my CSS file, the only thing I want to do now just to add a hover state so we can have some feedback going on here. And the only thing I'm going to do is say color, it's going to be white on hover, and I'm going to add a background color which is going to be 5640B1. 5640B1, and when we hover, you guys can see we get some feedback that we're hovering over these numbers. But now when you click on a number, nothing happens, and that's where we're adding our functionality. So we've designed a car, now we need to add an engine to it, and we do that inside of this calculator.js file. And first thing we need to do basically inside our display section equal to document.attribute document.get element by ID, and that ID is display. And the next thing I want to do is to get my button, so I can go ahead and create a variable called buttons is equal to document.get elements by class name. So all of the elements inside of this HTML document that has a class called button, get them and save them inside of that variable. But now if you quickly have a look at buttons, when you do console.log, if we save that, we do F12, you guys will see that I'm sitting with HTML collections of 18, and I can't really do anything with this unless I convert them to an array, which I can map through or filter, or add like an event listeners to the elements of an array through a map, which is much easier than trying to work with each individual button, right? So what I can do is just to convert this HTML collection into an array, and the way we do that is inside of our JavaScript file is to say array.from, and I'm saying create an array from all of these elements. So from this collection, create an array for me. So if I save this, you guys will see immediately that changed into an array of 18 elements, and now we can work with those elements as you would do an array. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that console.log. I'm going to close this, and the first thing I'm going to do is to just map over this button. So I'm going to go ahead and say buttons, which is now our array. I'm going to say map, and I'm going to take individual button, and in an individual button I'm going to do this function. I'm going to say individual button. I can go ahead and say button dot add an event listener to it, and the event we want to listen to is a click event. So once you click on this button, pass through its element. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a function now, which is called to calculate, and this function is going to take in that element. So basically every time you click on this button of which in this array, this function will fire. So let's look at that quickly. So I'm going to say function to calculate, which takes in the element, and I'm going to say console.log the current element that was click. So I'm going to say element dot target. So let's save this and let's have a look. So if I click on AC, you would see that I get that div button span AC. I click on 9, I click on 8. So I'm getting back the elements that are currently clicked, and I can go ahead and work with those individual elements inside of my to calculate function, obviously. So let me go ahead and remove this console.log. So the first thing that I want to do is basically run a switch statement in this. So I'm just going to do a switch statement, and my switch statement is going to be based off my element provided. So I can say the current element dot target dot inner text. So I'm going to work with this basically inner text of all of these elements. So the first thing I want to do, I want to say if this inner text is equal to AC, what I want to do is to say display, which is the variable above, display underscore section dot its inner text is going to be equal to 0. Okay, so basically what I'm saying that once you click AC, doesn't matter what the inner text was of display, I wanted to set it to 0. So I'm defaulting it back to 0. So my default behavior, what I want it to be is basically to set this guy's inner text to whatever is clicked in here, right? So just add everything together as I am clicking in here. That's going to be my default behavior for my calculator. So in order to make more sense of that, if I go ahead and say display section dot inner text is equal to E for that element dot target dot inner text. Okay, so basically this is just going to go ahead and say set this value to 8, now set it to 9, now set it to 4, and set it to 2, etc., as you guys can see. But this is not how a calculate works. The more numbers you click, it adds them together. So what we can do over here is just to add that plus sign to say add this new value to whatever exists currently. So if you save that, now we can go ahead and say 7, 5, 8, and you guys can see that gets added, plus 20 is equal to, and it adds all of that. So that's going to be our default behavior. So the next case statement we want to do is actually the delete one. So I can go ahead and say case, someone clicks on del for delete. What I want to do is to say display section dot inner HTML or inner text, sorry, is equals to display section dot inner text. So take the current display section inner text and slice it. So start from 0 of the string, start from the beginning of the string and remove elements from the end. That's basically what the -1 does. So basically slice will say where you need to start slicing the string, which is the start, which is the beginning, and where you need to end is to -1, is to say, okay, now take the last, remove the last character of the string, basically. And what we need to do here in order not to execute this default functionality is just to add a break to it. So I'm going to go ahead and save. So if you go ahead and just type in here random numbers and we click on delete, and you guys will see it removes the numbers from the back, and this is basically what we want with our calculator. So that's delete, and the next one we want to do is our equal sign. So I'm going to say case. Let me just add some spacing to this so it looks a bit more neat. So I'm hit enter. I think this looks a bit better. There we go. So once someone has hit the equal sign, we want to calculate the value of the display text. And now we can do this to say, okay, take display text dot inner text and set it to the evaluation of whatever is inside it, right? So I'm going to say evaluate display section dot inner text. So evaluation is a built-in JavaScript function that actually does exactly that. It evaluates whatever's inside of it. So if you give it 5 and a plus sign and a 5, it will evaluate that and gives you back 10. So if I save this just to show you, save it. If I say 5 plus 5, it gives me 10 with the equal sign because of this default behavior, which now I have to go ahead and stop by adding a break to it. You guys might have noticed that this 0 is actually stuck there whenever we want to do our calculations, which is not what we want. We want it as soon as someone clicks a number, that 0 actually disappears, right? So we need to go ahead and set that up. How we can do that inside of our do calculation function is to do an if statement right here on top. So our if statement is going to do the following. So I'm going to say if display section dot inner text is equal to 0, which is basically a string, is equal to 0, and then do the following. So what I want to do is say display section dot inner text must then be equal to an empty string. So what this will do is as soon as you click any of these buttons, it will go ahead and remove the 0, make it blank, and fill it up with the functionality hooked up to that button. So if I save this, you guys will see if I click on 7, it removes the 0 and make that 7. I see, puts back the 0. If I do 5 to 9, I do delete, issue. So delete doesn't put back the 0 once it removed everything inside of the string, and that is the next thing we're going to take a look at, how we can solve that issue. So that we can do by adding an if statement here under this case of if of delete. So if display section dot inner text, so if there's something inside of this inner text, only then so if there's something inside of display, only then do we do our slice functionality. And we want to reset this as well to say if display section dot inner text is equal to nothing, which means that we are trying to hit delete while we have nothing to remove, just do a reset of this back to 0. So I'm just going to say display section dot inner text will be equal to the string 0. So recap, we have 5 numbers, we're hitting delete, so it finds it to be true. It slices until it does evaluates not a true anymore, because now this is blank. Then this if statement kicks in to say, okay, we see there's nothing there, the delete button was clicked, let's just reset it back to 0. Let's save that and let's see if that is the case. So I'm going to click a couple of random numbers, click delete, another delete, reset it back to 0, because now we have jumped over this slice, but now we're saving that, resetting that back to 0, which is exactly what we want. Well, last thing that we need to take a look at before our challenge is to say, what if someone goes and say, I actually added 2 pluses over here instead of multiply. Let's go ahead and sort that out. So it's going to add it there for now, doesn't matter. So what if someone go ahead and say, I want to say plus multiply divide is equal to, and JavaScript is getting a trip to say, I don't understand what you want me to do. So it's throwing this error here in our console.log, but the user doesn't know to check console.log. So we need to display this error for them. And the way we can do this is actually by wrapping this evaluate function in a try catch. So I'm going to say try executing this function. And if you're unable to execute this function, catch an error for me and then just display that error. And we're going to display that error in display section dot inner text equal to error. Let's save that. So now what we're saying is if someone go ahead and say plus times divide is equal to, it shows them error. So it gives the user the feedback that the calculation you want me to do, I don't know how to do it, so sorry, error. You can go ahead and clear this. And now the other issue that I want to bring to your attention is the following, is that if I have an error and I click on delete, I don't want that to happen. If I have an error and I click on any other button, I also do not want that to happen. I only want you to be able to click the AC button once there's an error. So if there's an error, only the AC button can click on that one, resets everything back to 0. But you should not be able to delete, you shouldn't be able to press any other of these buttons. So how we can do that is up to you. How would you go ahead and do that? Go ahead and copy this code. Once you have done doing this function, or once you have done doing this calculator, add that functionality to block all of these other elements from working instead of the AC one, and add your code inside of the comment section inside of the comment section so that I can check it out, and then you will get a heart if you go ahead and do that. For the guys that just comment on this one, will get a thumbs up. If you haven't done so, like this video, hit the subscribe button if you haven't done so. If you have any comments, guys, or any questions, hit me up in the comment section. I'll be more than happy to assist you. Remember, complete it, go ahead and do it. This only will help you to become a better developer. So guys, until next time, stay safe.